The people in town said the cottage had been wrong since 1987. Nathan Cole had heard this 3 times in the 2 days since he arrived in Cutler, Maine. The woman at the post office, the man running the bait shop at the harbor, the neighbor 2 properties down, who had come to introduce herself and had managed, within 4 minutes, to work in the fact that something about the property made people uncomfortable and had for a long time. Nathan thanked each of them and went back to the cottage and told Hatch about it, and Hatch listened with the focused attention he gave to all information Nathan considered worth repeating, which was not much. The cottage was on a headland above the harbor. His Aunt Margaret had lived there for 31 years, alone, and had apparently been entirely unbothered by whatever the town had decided about the property. She had died in January at 77, which was how Nathan, her only surviving relative, had ended up driving north from Portsmouth in February with a Dutch shepherd and a sleeping bag, and no clear idea what he was going to do with a Maine coastal cottage in the middle of winter. What he knew was that a land trust called the Down East Coastal Conservancy had sent a letter to the estate attorney 2 weeks after Margaret's death, asserting that a 1974 access agreement gave the trust management authority over the coastal frontage of the property, specifically the path from the cottage down to the water and the small dock at the base of the headland. If the trust's claim was valid, Nathan could own the cottage but would have no meaningful control over the most valuable part of what he had inherited, which was the access to the water. He had come to figure out what he actually had. Hatch had come because Hatch went where Nathan went, which had been the arrangement since Nathan adopted him from a Coast Guard working dog retirement program 6 years ago. The cottage was small and solid, and smelled like wood smoke and salt, and the specific combination of lavender and machine oil that Nathan associated with his aunt from the few times he had visited as a child. Margaret had been a precise woman. Everything in the cottage was in a specific place, and had been there long enough that the surfaces around it had conformed to its absence when Nathan moved things. He did not move much. He was a guest in someone else's order, and he respected that. Hatch explored the cottage methodically the first evening. Every room, every corner, under the furniture, along the baseboards. He came back to the main room and sat down and appeared satisfied. Then, on the second night, he went to the cellar door and sat beside it. Nathan noticed, but did not act on it. Hatch was a thorough dog, and the cellar was part of the property. He would get to it. Hatch was at the cellar door again the following morning before Nathan was awake. Nathan had learned over 6 years to distinguish between the behavior of a dog who was curious and the behavior of a dog who was certain. Hatch was not pressing his nose to the door or scratching at it. He was sitting beside it the way he sat beside things he had already decided were important and was waiting for Nathan to catch up. Nathan made coffee and took it down with him. The cellar was low and stone-walled, the kind built into the granite of the headland itself, so that the cottage sat on bedrock, and the cellar was cut into it rather than dug from soil. It was dry and cold, and lit by one bare bulb that Nathan pulled to life on a cord near the bottom of the stairs. Margaret had used it for storage. Shelving along 3 walls held provisions, canned goods, tools, the kind of accumulation that a person living alone on a headland in Maine builds over decades against the possibility of being cut off by weather for an extended period. It was organized and practical and completely consistent with everything Nathan knew about his aunt. Hatch moved past Nathan at the bottom of the stairs and went directly to the north wall. Not the shelving, the wall itself. the stone behind the last shelf unit on the right side. Nathan pulled the shelf unit away from the wall. The stones behind it were field stone, same as the rest of the cellar, mortared in place, cold and gray. But the fourth stone from the floor on the right side had mortar around it that looked different. Not newer in the way that announced itself, just slightly lighter, slightly cleaner than the surrounding mortar. Nathan worked at it with a pry bar. The stone came out after 20 minutes. Behind it was a gap in the wall, and inside the gap was a tin box, the kind sold in hardware stores for document storage, sealed along the lid with electrical tape that had dried and cracked but held. Hatch sat back and watched him carry it to the staircase, where the light was better. Inside the tin, protected by the electrical tape and the cold, dry air of the cellar, was a collection of documents held together with a rubber band that disintegrated when Nathan touched it, and a smaller envelope on top addressed in his aunt's handwriting. To whoever finds this, if you are Nathan, good. If you are someone else, put it back. Nathan opened the envelope. Margaret had written 2 pages in the practical, unornamented hand she had used for everything. She explained the contents of the tin and why she had hidden them. The first document was the original deed to the cottage and the headland property, issued in 1923 to a fisherman named Alton Rowe, Margaret's grandfather on her mother's side. The deed included a specific notation in the property description: right of access to and use of coastal frontage, dock, and path in perpetuity, attached to the property and not subject to separate conveyance or encumbrance. Perpetuity, not transferable. Attached to the property. The Down East Coastal Conservancy's 1974 agreement, Margaret wrote, had been signed not by any property owner, but by a county planning official who had no authority to grant or limit the access rights described in the 1923 deed. She had known this since 1978, when she first looked into the trust's claim. She had consulted an attorney who had confirmed it. She had informed the trust of this in writing in 1979, and they had gone quiet for 30 years before sending a new letter in 2009 asserting the same claim again. Margaret had informed them again in writing in 2009 that their claim had no basis and that she was in possession of the original deed. She had hidden the deed in the cellar because, she wrote, she did not trust that it would remain safe in the house after she was gone. She had seen what happened to documents when estates were managed by people who did not know what they were looking at. She had decided the safest thing was to put it somewhere a person with genuine reason to find it would find it, and somewhere a person with no reason to find it would not look. She had written, "I assume Hatch will sort it out. He was always a sensible dog." Nathan looked at Hatch. Hatch looked at the tin. Nathan read the rest of the letter. The second matter Margaret addressed was the lights. She had been running an informal maritime beacon from the cottage since 1987. Her husband, William, had died in 1986 when his fishing boat went down in a November storm off the headland. After that, she had installed a light in the upper window of the cottage on a timer that ran from dusk until dawn during the months when the harbor fleet was active. It was not an official navigation aid. It was a fixed point of reference for boats coming in around the headland in poor visibility. She had told no one about it officially because she had not wanted to deal with the Maritime Administration paperwork. The town had seen the light for 31 years and decided the cottage was haunted. Margaret wrote, "I thought about clarifying this several times and decided against it. It was not their business, and the light was doing its job." Nathan sat on the cellar stairs for a long time. Then he drove into Cutler and found a payphone outside the harbor store and called the estate attorney. The attorney, a woman named Carol Price, who practiced in Machias and had handled Margaret's estate from the beginning, listened to Nathan's description of the 1923 deed without interrupting. Then she asked him to read the specific language of the access notation twice. After the second reading, she said, "That language is as strong as any I have seen in a deed of that period. Perpetuity attached to the property, and not subject to separate conveyance, is unambiguous. Whatever the 1974 agreement says, it cannot override a property right established in the original deed." Nathan asked about the Conservancy's position. Carol said the Conservancy had been sending letters based on the assumption that the original deed either did not exist or could not be produced. She said, in her experience, land trusts of that type relied heavily on document fatigue, on property owners who could not find or had never seen the original instruments. She said, producing the 1923 deed would likely end the dispute without litigation. She said she would contact the Conservancy the following morning. Nathan drove back to the cottage. He put the tin box on the kitchen table and sat across from it, and Hatch lay down on the floor beside his chair. The light in the upper window was still there. Margaret had left it installed. Nathan went upstairs and looked at it. A simple marine-grade lamp on a mechanical timer, set in the window frame with brackets she had made herself from hardware store materials. It was not sophisticated. It had run every night for 31 years. He checked the timer, set to come on at dusk. He left it as it was. The Conservancy's attorney called Carol 2 days later. After reviewing the 1923 deed and consulting with the Conservancy's board, they were withdrawing the access claim. Their letter arrived the following week, formal and bloodless, stating that upon further review, the 1974 agreement did not apply to the property in question. Nathan framed the letter, not because he was proud of winning, because Margaret had been right about this for 45 years, and had spent 45 years being right quietly by herself on a headland, while a land trust sent letters and a town decided her cottage was haunted, and the least he could do was put the ending somewhere he could see it. He stayed through the spring. He had not planned to, but he had not planned anything specific. His Coast Guard retirement gave him enough to live on, and the cottage needed work that was easier to do in his own time than to hire out. He repointed the mortar on the north cellar wall where he had removed the stone. He repainted the exterior. He replaced 2 sections of the dock that had deteriorated and reinforced the pilings. He found 2 of Margaret's former neighbors who remembered William. They told him things about his uncle he had not known, about how good he had been on the water, and how fast the harbor had gone quiet the week after the storm. Nathan listened and did not say much. He was a person who had spent most of his adult life in conditions where listening was more useful than talking, and the habit had not left him. The light ran every night, dusk to dawn. Nathan checked it once a week and left it alone otherwise. In May, a fishing boat came into the harbor in poor visibility, a fog that had settled over the headland in the late afternoon and had not lifted by dark. The captain told Nathan the following morning at the harbor store that the cottage light had been his reference point for the last mile of the approach. He said it had always been there, and he had always used it, and he had never known whose it was. Nathan said it was his aunt's. The captain said she had been running it a long time, and that a lot of boats had come in on it over the years, and that it was a good thing she had kept it going. Nathan said he intended to keep it going. He drove back to the headland and took the coast road slowly, the way he had started taking it, watching the water and the light on it in the morning, and thinking about a woman who had lost her husband to the sea and spent the next 31 years making sure the sea gave other people's husbands back. Hatch rode with his head out the window, the way he always did on coastal roads, reading whatever it was Dutch shepherds read in salt air at speed, his ears flat, his eyes half closed against the wind. He had been a Coast Guard dog. He had spent his working life around water and boats, and the specific human activity of watching the horizon for things that needed help. He had known the cottage was the right place almost immediately. Nathan had taken 2 days longer to catch up, which was about average for them. He did not hold it against him. Every story on this channel starts the same way. A veteran and his dog, and something the dog knew before the man did. New story next week. Subscribe if you want to be here when it drops.